I'd like to introduce our next speaker. And again, you've heard from him yesterday. This is Damon Jacobs, and he'll be talking about PrEP facts. So Damon is a New York-based licensed marriage and family therapist and HIV prevention specialist who focuses his work on sexual health, harm reduction, and social justice. He is the author of 2 books, Rational Relating and Absolutely Should Less. He is best known for championing the use of pre-exposure prophylaxis, otherwise known as PrEP, through his appearances on MSNBC, NPR, Vice TV, Here TV, as well as the New York Times, USA Today, Out Magazine, and many more. Damon will be bringing his experiences as a tireless PrEP advocate to this year's summit.
How do I do this?
No.
1 second. Oh yeah, that looks familiar. Okay. Great. And then I use this.
I think so. Otherwise,
Okay, good. Hi. Thanks for your patience with that. I'm so excited to be here. I want to thank Joshua, Edward, and Jody, and Michael, and everyone who made it possible for me to be here today. One of the reasons why I am so excited is because after 26 years of working in this profession, this is by far the most exciting time to be working in this field, right? And I can't wait to talk about why. A lot of you know where I'm going with that, but we're going to get there in a minute. But before that, I just want to back up a little bit. Because I came into this field, I came out and moved to the San Francisco Bay Area in the early 1990s. And as many of us in this room can vividly recall, that was truly a time when our community was being devastated by AIDS. That meant that if you lived in the community, you knew people who died of AIDS. If you lived with people with AIDS, you lost people to AIDS. If you loved people with AIDS, you lost people to AIDS. If you had sex with people with AIDS, you lost people to AIDS. And I lost a lot of people during that time. And it was also a time that if you were sexually active, especially in San Francisco, every encounter was fraught with a sense of, is this the time where I'm going to get AIDS? Is this the time where I'm going to pay for it? Is this the time where I'm going to become infected, which was the terminology we used? So that was a very traumatizing, trying time for all of us. And at the same time, I was in school learning about psychology, really wanting to play a role in being a healer in this community. And the education I was getting seemed so incongruent with what was happening socially that people weren't coming into the therapy office necessarily to talk about their mother or their father or their dead dog, but they were talking about their friends who were dead, who had died so suddenly. And it seemed like if one was going to be serious about working in this field and helping to heal our community, it meant more than just sitting in an office all day, but getting out into the streets, getting active, standing up, fighting back, and being involved fundamentally in education. Well, in the early 90s, for me, what that meant was getting involved with a really cool agency at the time called Stop AIDS Project. And we were really focused on education. So we would go out to bars, to clubs, to street corners, and try to educate people about condoms, condoms, condoms. And we had this slogan in the summer of 1992 called the 100% campaign. Was anyone aware of that or remember seeing those ads? Because we had like billboards and we had newspaper ads and I think we had t-shirts. This idea is that every person, quote, should wear a condom 100% of the time. If every person wore a condom in 100% of their sexual encounters, then we would eradicate AIDS by the millennium. And medically, it kind of made sense, right? So condoms only was what we were dealing with. And this wasn't me, but this was similar to what we were doing. Yelling and screaming at people, use condoms, use condoms, use condoms. But what was the outcome of that, I ask you? You just shout out. People did not embrace the condom. Now, some people did use condoms. But if we look at the CDC numbers, it's kind of hard to see, but I'll just show you here. Despite our best prevention efforts, new HIV infection rates remain stagnant all throughout from the mid-90s onward in the US. So you can see that they were very high in the 80s. They stayed the same. They dropped down to 80,000 around the mid-80s, and then they dropped to about 50,000 in 1993 and stayed even after that. A little up, a little down, but pretty much even. And so clearly this condoms only message was not going to be sufficient. Now, and remember, before we had treatment medications available in 1996, sex without a condom was tantamount to suicide in a way. But you look at the numbers and you see people still became newly infected consistently over that time. And for me, what that ultimately taught me is that, okay, if you're doing messaging that is completely absent from talking about pleasure, from talking about intimacy, that's talking about connection and fun and the reasons why people have sex in the first place, you're going to lose a lot of people in that message. If you equate bodies to behavior, if you consider condomless sex to be low literacy, in reference to what we talked about in here yesterday, you're going to lose people, and these are the numbers you're going to see. Thank you. So this really taught me, now again, but all we knew at this time was condoms, and all we knew was abstinence in terms of preventing HIV. So a lot of us that were in the community that were trying to do compassionate sex affirmative work weren't exactly even sure how to do that or how to translate that. Now, my story is going to skip ahead quite a bit now at this point, and I'm going to go forward to 2010. Because by 2010, I was living in New York City, I was building my private psychotherapy practice, and I was also doing work with another wonderful organization called Project Achieve in Union Square. And Project Achieve was one of the designated sites to do the HVTN 505 trial that was taking place. This was a phase 2B vaccine trial that was testing the efficacy of an HIV vaccine. And once again, it was my job to run around to bars and clubs and sex clubs and talk to people about sex and talk about prevention and try to get them educated and inspired to want to be part of an HIV vaccine trial. And the drag community, by the way, in New York City was lots of folks were very supportive of this. And some of even the contestants that went on to RuPaul's Drag Race, like Peppermint, were very supportive of this work and would sometimes give me time on her stage to share with her audience like this about safer sex prevention and vaccine trials. Well, the day before Thanksgiving, our American holiday Thanksgiving, in November 24th, 2010, we were summoned to the office for an emergency meeting. Does anyone know why? Does anyone know why we had to be there on November 24th, 2010? Good. Oh, great. We're going to learn a lot. So the news was breaking that the New England Journal of Medicine was about to publish the results of the PrEP study. This was the first study that showed that use of a pill called Truvada could significantly reduce HIV acquisition in a person who is HIV negative. And because I was out in the clubs and the bars and I was answering people's questions about sex all night, I had to be able to answer questions once this came out and once everybody learned about this and found out about this, I had to be able to answer to it. Otherwise, as a lot of you know, if you're doing outreach in the field and you don't know answers to questions, it sort of isn't always such a good thing. So this came out, and the final results came out December 30th of 2010. And what happened after that? Right, nothing, zero, silence. The media barely covered this. Our agencies and organizations didn't talk about this, and nobody asked me about it. And I kind of forgot about it, to be honest with you. But over the next half of 2011, a few things changed for me in my personal life. A long-term relationship that I had been in came to an end, and we're still very good friends today. But that meant that in 2011, in New York City, I was getting out into the dating world, into the cruising world, into the hookup world again. And I can tell you for certain that the condom use by 2011 was pretty much done. It was pretty much over with. People were not using condoms in 2011 in New York City. And much to my cognitive dissonance, much to my own inner conflicts, I was not asking people to use condoms the way I had so vigilantly in those San Francisco days. That experience of pleasure and intimacy was overcoming what I understood to be safe sex. And I'm like, but wait a second, I'm like a therapist, I'm an educator, I'm an activist, but I am not doing these, I'm not doing things that I know could keep me prevented from getting HIV, which is what we call cognitive dissonance in the field, right? The other thing that was going on was that I was turning 40 that year. And after over 22 years of being sexually active, I was like, when is this ever going to be done? When will I ever get to have the kind of pleasurable sex that I want to have without fear, without the terror of becoming HIV positive afterwards? And in my mind, it was like, well, the only way that's ever going to happen is if you actually become HIV positive. Because the way we're going, with all the research, as far as we are from a cure and a vaccine, I started to think to myself, it's unlikely I'm going to know this in my lifetime. And that the only way I can enjoy the kind of intimacy I want to have is to become HIV positive. And that might sound shocking to some of you, probably not a lot of you, but I can promise you that a lot of our friends and loved ones who acquired HIV were often having the same thoughts. That the relationship to HIV was more about when, not if. It felt like this inevitability. As luck and fate and science would have it, I was sent to another training about PrEP that year through Gay Men's Health Crisis, again through my job with vaccine research. And in the summer of 2011, some of the researchers were talking with us about PrEP, and they really drove home the point. No one in this study who took Truvada pills 7 days a week acquired HIV. No one who took it 4 or more days a week acquired HIV, even when they were at acute risk of acquiring HIV. When I heard that, a light bulb went on. And I decided to use Truvada for myself as a consumer. Fortunately, I had a doctor that supported that. And I have now been using it consistently since July 19th, 2011. And when I say that, people sometimes say, well, wow, that's been like 6 years. What are the side effects? I'm like, well, the side effects that I've had are that I feel wonderful. And I'm having great sex, and I'm not worried anymore. And I sleep better at night, and I'm able to get more other things done because I'm not spending so much time worrying and losing sleep about HIV. Those are the side effects for me. And when I started using this, that was the unintended side effects. It's what I call the unintended side effects of using PrEP for a lot of us, is that suddenly this weight, 2 decades of fear were being lifted. 2 decades of fear that I didn't know were there. Even though I'm like a therapist and an educator, I didn't know that. And I'm like, this is amazing. Why is everybody not taking this? And I was like, well, maybe it's because nobody knows about it. And at that time, the FDA hadn't approved it. So, and my insurance, I was a little sketchy about how my insurance was covering it. My insurance was covering it, but it wasn't exactly approved by the FDA. So I was concerned about being open about my use of it. Then July 16th, 2012, what happened then? The FDA approved Truvada for PrEP as the first HIV prevention strategy ever. And yes, you heard that correctly. This is the first HIV prevention strategy to ever be approved by the FDA. Condoms were never approved by the FDA for HIV prevention. They were approved for pregnancy prevention, not HIV prevention. They have just been used for HIV prevention because we had nothing else. And they make sense. We know they work when they're used consistently. But we've never known how well, and there's no science that really backs that up, so the FDA had never approved them before. So now, 2012, right? We've got it. The FDA approved it. That meant insurance was going to cover it. And I was like, this is it. People are going to learn about this now. People are going to find out, and they're going to be happy, and they're going to celebrate. And I thought, like, you know, we were all going to, like, go to the Stonewall Bar in the West Village and laugh and cry and embrace and say, this is it. Finally, we're at the beginning of the end of this horrifying, traumatic epidemic that's affected so many of us. But what happened instead? Silence, nothing, exactly. Thank you. You answered my question. Nothing. It was ignored. Again, the media didn't cover it. The agencies and organizations, our Department of Health, our doctors, wouldn't talk about Truvada for PrEP in New York City. And I'm like, this is getting weird, right? Suddenly, we have a way to end HIV infections by 99 or greater %. Why is no one willing to talk about this? This is when I started opening up about it and started telling some of the people in nightlife that I was working with, who I was talking about vaccine research with. one thing led to another, and one of the people who I talked to about this got invited to go on the Huffington Post. His name is Carl Sandler. He's the founder of Daddy Hunt, and he was invited to go on the Huffington Post Live, and this was back when Huffington Post Live was a thing that people actually watched. And he was invited to go on and talk to somebody and actually be in a debate with somebody about Truvada for PrEP. And Carl came to me and said, I really want to do this, but I don't know much about it. Will you go on the show with me to do this? I was like, yeah, sure. So this was November 8th, 2012, to talk, the very first time I had publicly talked about PrEP, and the first time in my career I had ever publicly discussed my pleasure for bareback sex. And you mentioned the professional risks earlier. I really weighed that as like, is this going to be, am I going to tank my career here? Am I going to be seen as a parasite in my community because I'm going to talk about this? Well, I went on November 8th, 2012. The segment went really, really well, and I thought, okay, this is it. Now everyone's going to learn about this. People are going to start talking about this. For better or for worse, people are at least going to learn what PrEP is. And then what happened after that? Yeah, how'd you know that? After that, the backlash began. So this time, people did learn about it. Through the Huffington Post, people learned, but then the backlash immediately came. 3 days later, this was on the Huffington Post, was the infamously titled article, Truvada Whores. And this was intended to stigmatize and shame anyone, including me, who was going to use Truvada to prevent HIV. And unfortunately, this is how a lot of people heard about PrEP for the first time. It was through this lens of stigma and shame and pathology. And this is the part that went viral, as they say. This is the part that people really learned about. About 6 months later, the vaccine trial that I had been working on at that point now for 4 years came to an end because after 4 years of studying a vaccine, the efficacy was 0. So the funding ended, my job ended, and I was really disappointed because I truly do want to see a vaccine. And it was the summer of 2013 that I was walking down 7th Avenue, feeling really disappointed that I had lost my job in vaccine research and that we didn't have a vaccine that was promising anymore. And one of the drag queens who had shared the stage with me during her show came up to me and said, how's it going? How's everything going? And I was like, it's not so good. I lost my job. The vaccine research is over, but at least until we have a vaccine or a cure, we have PrEP. And my friend was like, what's PrEP? And I'm like, well, let me tell you, PrEP is this daily pill that prevents HIV, and it's 99%, and I've now been on it for 2 years, and the FDA approved it a year ago, and at least it's something that we have that we've never had before. And I got all excited and flailed because I do that when I talk about PrEP. But my friend just stood there and looked at me and said, why didn't you tell me about PrEP? I just tested positive 3 months ago. And every time we had talked, you didn't tell me there was a pill that would prevent HIV or that my insurance would have paid for that. Why didn't you tell me? What could I say? Because my friend was right. I was strangely speechless, which if you know me is a rare thing. But he was right. And all the work that I had done, everything, was like I had not shared that information. It wasn't my job to talk about PrEP. It was my job to talk about vaccines and condoms, but not about PrEP. So I'm being told I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip over. But that really changed my definition of what is a job. It led me to start this group because enough is enough already. By the summer of 2013, we still had nobody that would talk about PrEP in New York City. And I'm like, you know what? This isn't the 90s anymore. All you need is a Wi-Fi connection and a large cup of coffee. And I probably didn't even need the coffee. So I started this group on July 1st, 2013. Many of you are members, and I hope many more of you will be after this, so that we could talk about these experiences honestly and humanly, about pleasure, about sex, about condoms when those come up, about stigma when that comes up, about the pleasure of exchanging bodily fluids when that comes up, but we could do this in rational, scientific ways. Soon afterwards, the New York Times got hold of this. They did a feature about PrEP. They talked about my group. This is me on the front page of the health section trying to look butch. I don't think I do. But they don't let you smile when you do these things, so. Soon after that, the Affordable Care Act passed in the United States, which was really significant in people having access to PrEP. Soon after, our CDC endorsed it. Soon after, the World Health Organization endorsed it in the summer of 2014. All of these things led to more media, more coverage, more access, more people demanding it from people in the US and outside the US. In the fall of 2015, Shonda Rhimes featured PrEP and a storyline and How to Get Away with Murder. I don't know how many of you watched that or if that's popular here, but in the States, that was really popular. The World Health Organization endorsed the Facebook group page that I run as a source of information and support, which was significant in showing how social media is changing the landscape of HIV prevention, not the agencies and the organizations as much as the social media and the activists. And then the awesome news, which isn't being talked about enough this weekend, but just for next summit, is that on August 1st, 2016, we got the confirmation from the Partners study, confirming what we already knew, but with even more science, that a person living with HIV who is undetectable consistently for 6 months or more cannot transmit HIV to others, simply humanly cannot transmit HIV to others. Remember where I said I was excited? This is why I'm excited. Now, look at what we've got. On the prevention side, we've got PrEP to prevent HIV. On the treatment side, we've got treatment, which extends the quality and quantity of lives for people living with HIV and at the same time happens to prevent HIV at the same time. And what happens when we put that together? Breaking news! Now, this is a little while ago, but for the first, remember those numbers I showed you before that were stagnated? They came down in 2014 for the first time in over 20 years. The CDC reported an 18% drop in new infections in the United States, partly because of PrEP and partly because of TASP. As many of you heard from my colleague Will yesterday, in London, significant drops, partly due to PrEP, partly due to TASP. This article says between 2015, 2016, a 32% drop. We're hearing similar stories in New York City and San Francisco, unprecedented record low new diagnoses of HIV, not because people are getting tested less, but because the positive results are few and far between. This is the potential that sits before us today. But what this tells you from a legislative perspective, why people use PrEP, I'm going to very, very, very briefly tell you the personal side. When I talk about this, I talk about PLEASURE, and PLEASURE is an acronym, and this is based on my experience and the thousands and thousands of people who talk about this in the PrEP Facts group. The P is the peace of mind that we experience knowing that we will not acquire HIV. And remember, I told you how, for me, so early in my experiences were based in fear. PrEP gives us peace of mind we've never had before. It gives us a locus of control. That means I get to decide what happens to my body in a way that's never happened before. I make that decision when I rationally and soberly take that pill every day. It changed my expectation of staying HIV negative because, like I told you, for me, HIV felt like an inevitability. It felt like a when, not an if. Now, it is definitely not going to happen when I use PrEP. With that, it has given me and thousands of people a sense of agency. What that means is what we do with that control is that it often makes us say, I want to do this, or I can do this, or I can do a summit like this, or I can speak openly, do a public forum. I can talk about other things that are still affecting our community, like mental health, like smoking, like drug abuse, how that gets translated. Satisfying sex. Unity that we haven't had for many years. I could go on and on about these, but I'm being pulled off the stage, so they're gonna bring up the orchestra soon, so I have to. And I don't want to undermine the last part here. E, efficacy for bottoms, because yes, bottom lives. Because I think I can say this here. And I don't have to tell any women in the room that when you're the receptive partner, it is contingent on the other person to take care of your health. That introduces tension, right? That can introduce conflict and fear. But when I get to decide as a bottom, as the receptive partner, that no matter what anyone does or where they do it, I get to decide that I will not acquire HIV from this encounter, that is a sense of empowerment that I have never had before in my entire sexual life, and neither have many other people who are currently using PrEP. These are some testimonials from the group. I don't have time to get into them. The one thing I want to point out is that women are using PrEP to conceive children with their HIV-positive partners and husbands. This is one of the PrEP babies in our group. She was born September 10th, 2015. I cry when I read this because this was a member of the group who learned about PrEP and decided to use it. These are just some of the faces of people you see. And I just want to ask you, I know I'm out of time, but when you see these faces, when you look at these faces, what comes to mind? What is the feeling or the mood that comes to mind? Say it. Pleasure, right? Smiles, right? Pride, happiness, life, right? People who are taking control through PrEP or TASP, taking control over their lives and their sexual destinies. This is why I say to you, this is the most exciting time ever to be working in this profession. And I need to say this. We can do this now. We have these tools now, right? We can do this. But will we do it? I think all of us in this room want to, but will we? I believe, because I'm an optimist, I believe we will. And I believe when we do, and then when that day comes, that there will be a celebration. There will be a cause for us to gather. We will gather, and we will laugh, and we will cry, and we're going to honor the people we've lost, and we're going to celebrate those that are here, and we're going to be able to look at each other in the eye and say thank you, because we did this together as a community with integrity, with intelligence, with respect and love. And I look forward to getting there with all of you. Thank you for your time.